The next way that we want to factor is to factor by grouping. And this we won't use as much when we're solving for quadratics, but we will definitely use it later when we're solving polynomials. So we want to kind of look at it now. So we're going to factor by grouping. What that's going to look like is that I'm going to have some GCFs in my expression, okay? So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to group the first two terms, group the last two terms, and kind of treat them separately at first. So I think the easiest way to do a problem like this is to just kind of work through one of them, and I'll talk us through it at the same time. And we can kind of look at the steps as we go through. So let's say we have x cubed minus 4x squared plus 8x minus 32. So one thing to notice with this method is that I have four terms. We haven't had four terms yet. Okay, so that might be an indicator that I might be needing to do this factoring by grouping. Okay, so I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to group the first two terms together, and then I'm going to group the last two terms together. Okay, so I'm going to do this separate now. I'm going to focus on the first group, and I'm going to find the GCF here. So the GCF between x cubed and 4x squared would be an x squared. So if I take that out, I divide it out, I'd be left with an x minus a 4 there. Okay. I'm going to do the same thing in the second set. I'm going to find the GCF between 8x minus 32. My GCF is going to be 8. So if I divide that out, I'd get an x minus a 4. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of bring it back together. And what I should notice, if I've done this correctly, is that what I have inside of those parentheses should be exactly the same. If it is not, I either have factored it incorrectly or it's not factoring by grouping, okay? So if what I have inside those parentheses is the same, then I've done it right, and I'm going to now write my answer, okay? So I'm going to take, that's what I'm talking about here, I'm going to take my GCF, and then I'm going to take what's left over, okay? So my GCF is going to look like x squared plus 8. My leftover is going to look like x minus 4. That's what's left over after I take off my GCFs, and it's also what was in common. Okay, so that would be now factored by grouping. Let's try another one. Say we have something like 4x cubed minus 8x squared minus 5x plus 10. Right, so I'm going to group those first two together, and I'm going to group the last two together. So looking at those first two, I'm going to find my GCF. So my GCF is going to be 4x squared. Taking out that GCF, I'm going to end up with an x minus 2. All right, now let's look at the next group. Now, one thing that I notice here is this subtraction sign is going to be on the outside here. So we're going to talk about that here in just a minute. But I'm going to look for my GCF. So my GCF between 5 and 10 is going to be a 5. So if I take out that 5, I will be left with x and a 2, right? Now, I don't say positive or negative because let's look for a second. If I take out a negative 5, I'm actually going to be left with a negative 2 there. So I can think of this one of two ways. One way, if I bring out a negative, it's going to change the signs. The same way that it would change the sign if I multiplied or divided by a negative number. That's what's happening. Another way to think about it is, remember we said that what's in the parentheses has to be the same term. So here in the first one, I had an x minus 2. So I would need an x minus 2 in the second one. So that's also kind of a quick way to check to make sure, oh yeah, okay, I was supposed to bring out the negative and I just forgot, right? So always make sure that those terms are matching. So now when I go to write my answer, I'm going to take those GCFs, will become one of my factors, 4x squared minus 5, and my x minus 2, that leftover, or you can think about the term that was in common, will be my other factor. Okay. So I want to look at one more just so we can see. Sometimes there's a little twist in this at the end. So let's look at one we've got, sorry, wrong color there. We've got 4x to the third plus 16x squared minus 9x minus 36. So I'm going to start off with those first group and then my second group. With my first group, I'm going to find my GCF, which is going to be 4x squared. So taking out a 4x squared is going to leave me with x plus 4. Looking at my next group, I'm going to find my GCF, which is going to be 9. So bringing out, remember this time I'm going to bring out that negative. So I'm going to bring out a negative 9, which is going to leave me with x plus 4. All right, so now I go to write my answer. I would take my GCF. I'm going to have 4x squared minus 9. And then my leftover, or my match, which would be x plus 4. And you're thinking, okay, yeah, great, I'm done. Well, not really, because now when I look at this, I have to remember that there's more than one way to factor. So look at this first term here. 4x squared minus 9, we just looked at that. That's the difference of perfect squares. So just because I factored by grouping doesn't mean that I'm finished. I might also need to now factor by my difference of perfect squares. So I can reduce this to be 2x plus 3 and 2x minus 3, right? Taking my square roots. And then I have that x plus 4 from before, right? So now it's actually as simplified as possible. So don't forget, I can have more than one of these occurring at the same time.